coyotes or the neighbor's dog or anything else that might go dig up those eggs can't get at them, at least not as readily, and stake that thing all down to the ground. And that would be around the 1st of July. And then we let those go for about 90 days. And so in September, we would go back out to those places and collect. We'd carefully dig that ground up, and we'd collect any eggs that hadn't hatched yet or any of the young turtles, which would now be, again, like, just that big. And we would gather them up and put them in some of these plastic totes like you see here, and they would go to the zoo. And then the zoo raise those animals up for us, and I'll let David speak to exactly how they do that, but they give them some real good care and keep their metabolism high, keep the heat on them so they grow, and feed them a lot of protein-rich food. And in about 10 months, so the next July, they're already about this big, and that's bigger than a bullfrog can get them, basically. And that's the size of the animals we have here, and that's kind of where we're at in the story today. So we're going to release 9 animals today that have spent about 10 months at the zoo, and they represent the final releases for this year. And we've had this cooperative arrangement going with the Oregon Zoo now since second half of the 1990s. And through all these efforts with both zoos and so on, just in the gorge down here, we've released 1,200 and some odd of these turtles. And that that was pretty huge, beginning from a point where we really only had around 100 of them. And a couple really neat things have happened related to that. And that's that at least 2, and now probably this third site as well, the animals are reproductive. These ones that we have raised and then put back out there are also now having young. And so that means that we're really having an impact. We're kind of getting that sort of exponential kind of growth on the population and allow them to kind of reoccupy those habitats. And so that's been really positive. Another really neat thing that we've done is we've started 2 new populations of them. Remember I said they were only at these 2 places that were further east of here, but in the year 2000, for the first time, we released pond turtles back to this spot. And 5 years ago, I believe, we released them just on the other side of Beacon Rock down there on some state park lands, and in a wetland that's over there. And so we have a recovery plan, or a plan for how we want to manage this species that calls for 4 populations of them. We now have them in 4 places, and but that doesn't mean we want to quit working on them. We want to keep managing their habitat, taking care of those non-native predators, and doing some more of this releasing and kind of propagating of the population to try to get their numbers to build back up. And so pretty exciting to now have them in 4 places. And you guys asked on the walk over here why we chose this spot, and it's got some real advantages. One, it represents these riverine wetland habitats that would have been up and down more of the Columbia and connected, downstream on in through Washougal and Vancouver and the Sandy River and the mouth of the Willamette and the lower part of the Lewis River and all these kind of lower elevation riverine kind of places. So it's the right kind of place. And we thought the habitat looked good. On top of that, we knew it had a good population of the painted turtles, so that was a good sign that turtles can make a living here. And it's on public ownership. It's, of course, part of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge, as Jim talked about. It's generally closed to the public, so it's less likely to have people out here disturbing the animals and exploiting them and these kind of things. And it won't get developed or have some other land use in the future that might compromise its ability to support these wildlife. And those are really similar reasons why we chose the state park. And that really kind of fits that story as well. So we now have 4 places where they're on. The Forest Service cooperates with us on another one, and then we, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, owns the other one. So in some nice turtle future, it would be great if they could just occupy all kinds of habitats and up and down the whole river, and back through Puget Sound and so on. That would be a pretty ambitious goal. They're slow to grow even when we work on them, and a lot of their habitat, especially in Puget Sound, is just gone. But we have had a lot of success, and we've done a lot of good, and so I'm glad that you all got to come and hear the story of them today, and we'll have a chance to release some turtles and so on. But now maybe David, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about kind of what goes on at the zoo and how that relates to your conservation programs for rare species and how you take care of these guys and stuff.
Well, sure. So a couple of points. One, we're really happy to be involved with this species because it's one where we can make a difference. rearing them in the zoo. It's one of 6 species recovery programs that we have in the zoo. Probably most of you have heard that we're raising California condors for release back into the wild. We're also raising 2 species of butterfly, Oregon silver spot and the Taylor's checker spot. The cutest rabbit in North America, the Columbia Basin pygmy rabbit, and the Oregon spotted frog. And one of the points I want to make is that captive rearing and release back into the wild is really only a solution in a very small number of cases. So I wouldn't like people to go away with the idea that raising animals at the zoo and releasing back into the wild is the solution to all of our conservation problems. It certainly isn't. But unfortunately, there's a growing number of small isolated populations for which this is appropriate, and the western pond turtle is certainly one of them. As you've heard from Eric, we've made a very significant difference to the populations in the Tama River Gorge through this head starting process, which gets the turtles through that period of life when they're most likely to be killed in the wild. Of course, the captive rearing part is a very small part compared to the habitat restoration side of it, and we always need to acknowledge that. The other point I wanted to make is that it's the Woodland Park Zoo and the Oregon Zoo working together, and zoos really do work together for conservation. There's zoos in the Pacific Northwest are part of a Zoo and Aquarium Alliance that work on this project, and all the other species that I mentioned the Oregon Zoo works on, we're actually working with another zoo in the region as well as all the agencies and all the non-profits that are involved with that species. So it's really a collaborative effort between not just zoos but all the other agencies and people that own the land, the funders. It's a great community of people that we're working with. What we specifically do for the turtles, as Eric's kind of already referred to, is we receive the hatchlings, we raise them at the zoo, and actually the staff that do that are here right now. You raise your hands. Michelle Shireman back there has been raising turtles for how long? Long time. So if you want more details on exactly how we raise the turtles, go to these guys and talk more to them. But basically what we're doing is, whereas the wild turtles that go into hibernation throughout the winter and really hardly grow at all, these turtles come to the zoo, they're kept at warm temperatures, lots of light, and they're given a great diet for 9 months, so they grow a lot faster. In fact, we feel we're growing them about as fast as you can grow them and have them still remain healthy. So they come out here about the size of a 3-year-old wild turtle. As Eric has already said, at that point we know from radio tracking studies that the mortality is very low. So this head starting is a very effective way of rapidly increasing the population. And then when done in conjunction with habitat restoration, it seems to have been a very successful way of increasing those and protecting this population of turtles. It's one of the greatest success stories for us, because it's not often that you really get to see these significant mark under to a population of well over 1,500 now. So it could be that we're working ourselves out of a job here.
Well, there'll be more to. Okay. Do you guys want to talk about what you feed them and how often you feed them and how high you keep the lights on, and if you can tell people how they can come see them at the zoo? Maybe?
Yeah, Michelle will fill you in on that. The turtles live in the conservation lab in the North America section of the zoo. So if you follow signs to the Great Northwest, we have a lab where you can look at them through the windows. They're in a very warm room, so we do keep the windows shut. But if you happen to come on a Saturday, that's their weekly weigh-in day. And a lot of times we open the window and let everybody get a really... When they come in, they weigh about 5 grams. They're about the size of a quarter. And we put a little dot on them to identify them, so that throughout the time they're at the zoo, we know who they are as individuals, and we can track and make sure that they're gaining weight properly and growing at the right rate. And they stay with us, as we said, about 9 to 10 months. And during that time, every day of the week, they get a different food item. And we've noticed that when they're really young, they tend to like the insects, and we have to chop everything up really tiny for them. As they grow, they kind of change their likes, and they seem to eat a lot of fish. And actually, these guys have grown really fast this year, and they're, some of them were like 200 grams this year for release. And they don't like anything we want to offer them anymore, so they'll find something better out here in the wild. And then just before they leave, the game guys come in and they permanently notch their shells so that we know who they are, and then we have our veterinarians put transponders in them, little microchips like you put in a dog or a cat, and that way for the rest of their lives we know who they are, and these guys can track them in the wild. So we just give them a nice warm environment with lots of food, and instead of going down into the mud and hanging out for the winter when it's cold, at the zoo they're under basking lights, and they have a really wide spectrum of lighting. They have basking lights to sit under, they have black lights and fluorescent lights, and those are all on timers. And then with all that food available, as David said, they grow about to the size of a 3-year-old in about 9 to 10 months at the zoo. And then they're too big to be eaten by a lot of the invasive species like the bass and the bullfrogs. So they're safer out here.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so I thought you guys might like to see kind of some of the equipment that we use in this work, and so